Kelly's Eye, brought to you by Ellis Brown Architects.
Peter, what's Kelly's Eye looking at today?
Well, I think it's somebody in hospital, I'm not too sure.
Somebody in hospital?
Oh,
we're nowhere near a hospital.
Yeah, somebody's just stood in my way.
Oh, yes.
I'm actually looking through a shop window from across the road and I'm looking at a television, and it could be Holby City, or it could be Emergency Ward 10 or Casualty or whatever's on today, but now a whole family have stood watching it, so we can't see through them.
Yes. You can't stand here watching TV all night.
Well, you probably could. Wouldn't do you any good because you can't hear what it's saying. But up above it there's a big sign that says Colebourn, time to rent, and LCD or plasma TV here.
Yes.
So there you go.
This is a home entertainment centre.
21:11 it is, the time. That means we're here after 9 o'clock at night. And we're looking at the top of Victoria Street at a building which sells televisions. And in fact, if we look at it carefully, it extends through 1, 2, 3 shops. But I rather think the Colebourn empire extends to the next 2 shops as well, albeit that they're let off for other purposes.
And it's a long running business, I suppose, isn't it?
Yeah. T.H. Colebourn, I think he was always referred to as T.H. Colebourn, although he's Harold. He started it, in fact he started in partnership, but we go back further than him, because the first Colebourn in Victoria Street goes back to the 1870s, and I think that was his grandfather, maybe his father. He was a cork cutter.
Really?
And down in the shop that later became Norris Modern Press, he sold items made out of cork, but also I think fancy goods and leather goods and so on. Anyway, along comes T.H. T.H. was born in 1897. In his youth, sort of 10 years later, Baden-Powell starts the Scout movement, and T.H. Colebourn enters the Scout movement. And one of the things Scouts used to do was semaphore with flags.
Yes.
And then Morse code was another thing that they did. I mean, it was quite a thing for young lads. They could do all these things that you'd never do yourself. And through learning Morse code, when the First World War came along, of course, he entered into the signals unit or whatever it was. And I gather he was actually wounded, lost sight in one eye, which a lot of people didn't know.
Yes.
But then, after the First World War, he set up. Now, I know he was with Mr. Kermode and in Castle Street, but in the back of my mind, I'm sure I read somewhere once that he started in Allen Street by himself, and then when he moved to Castle Street, of course, it was a more populous area, he, like others, would make their own wireless sets.
Yes.
The cabinets were made by some local joiners, cabinet makers, Bell, Bridson and Lord. Well, Lord, I know, certainly continued, and he at one time was down in the Chester Street area, because my old boss, Tom Kenyock, the architect, had his plan cabinets made by, there's a little label on with Mr. Lord's name on.
Yeah.
And then, of course, gradually he went from Castle Street and came here to Victoria Street. And it was a firm that grew and grew, and he got the agency for Murphy. In fact, he was a great friend of Mr. Murphy himself. Our first television that my parents got was a Murphy. I'm surprised I haven't still got it, actually. And that came from Colebourn's. And, of course, he had these red vans that went round everywhere with Colebourn on the side, and an aerial sticking up, because all his vans were linked by radio, which was quite. I mean, now the corporation bin wagons and everything are done that way, but there he was in the very early days with his vehicles linked, and what is now Manx Radio was their big workshop.
That's right, it was. And Manx Radio is a key to T.H. Colebourn as well, because he became an MHK, having started an action group in the middle 50s with Clifford Irving and other people. He became an MHK for Castletown. And his son Roy Colebourn told me that on Finch Road they used to have a hoarding that they used in the wintertime. And on that hoarding, one of the signs they put up was, wanted a new bunch of keys to open the door to prosperity, I think.
Very clever.
Yes.
Well, that hoarding was in fact immediately opposite the wedding cake bit. There were a series of shops there, small shops. I mean, later on Bunny's model shop was there, and Susan Green had a hat shop there and what have you, and they belonged to the Palace Company. And above there was a great big hoarding, And in the summer, of course, that advertised events at the Palace and Derby
Yes.
Castle, but in the winter it was available
That's right.
for other people.
Yeah.
And that's obviously what he did.
And as far as Manx Radio is concerned, he was the key member of the House of Keys to get Manx Radio going in the first place. I mean, he drove that very hard.
Well, he drove it, and there was a picture of him driving the little David Brown tractor, which I think came from the Airports Board, of which
Yeah.
he was chairman, driving past the grandstand, towing the trailer in which Manx Radio started. But I've since learned he didn't actually drive it all
that's
the
right.
way. He was very good for publicity, and he caught up with it and swapped with the driver.
Yeah.
But no, he was well ahead of his time, and of course Colebourn's at one point had shops in Ramsey, Port Eyre and elsewhere on the island.
It's a large building, this corner building. In itself, then, it must have been here since, when would you suggest?
Oh, late 1870s, when
Yes.
this part of Victoria Street, as I say, in fact there are 5 units there in total.
Yes.
The one that says Panasonic, you notice, has got a
Yeah.
big window. I think that was the Bon Marché clothing shop at one point in time, and it was sort of 1930s modernised, so to speak. But they certainly started in just this end one, and then have gradually moved down and moved down. At one time there were workshops also in the upper floors, but I don't know whether they still use those
So
or
we've
not.
come a long way from homemade radio sets to the gadgets of today.
We have. He was a man who was tuned in.
Many of the most iconic buildings around the island have been designed by Ellis Brown Architects. Keep up with Ellis Brown today on Facebook or via ellisbrown.im.